need to analyze this data and bring it into SPSS. We didn't get through all the steps, and I also made a mistake. So in class, I said normalize the average strength to body weight using kilograms, but in fact, the correct answer is to use that in pounds. So we want to change that normalized strength to be consistent for all of our calculations. Then we're going to create a code book and import that data into SPSS. So in order to do that, so we got the average strength, that's the average of these two cells. And then here we're going to use the pounds, the weight of the person in pounds. So that should be, the column should be G2, not H2. And I think I made that mistake in class. Okay, so if I hold that at G2, that'll give me the calculation. As I go back and drag that equation down for all of those trials, that'll give me the correct calculation. We need to repeat that for each one of the measurements to normalize it correctly. So again, the average strength, when I highlight that, is going to be the average of those two values. And then this is going to be normalized back to G2, and you can just drag that down. The trick that I sort of did in class relatively quickly is just simply to push that value down with this little emphasized area on the cell. You can sort of see right here is the little solid blue dot, and you can see how it goes from a white plus to a black plus. And so when you do that, it just drags the equation down. Okay, so once you get that completed, do that for all of the strength data. Make sure it's all converted to pounds. And then make sure you calculated the compliance percentage. So the compliance percentage would be 20 divided by 31 to give you 65%, 17 divided by 24. And again, this is just an equation dividing each cell, the AY cell by the AZ cell, to get the compliance percentage. So I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of basic functions in Excel. The last thing that we need to make sure we do is I had some words that weren't correctly spelled in cleaning this data. So I want to take and make sure all that the healthies, and I'm copying and pasting, are spelled exactly right. So this is just cleaning my data. I'm just going through and making sure everything is consistent as I go through all my subjects. I'm just copying and pasting each one of those. Oh, there we go. There's a typo. So I can just hit paste, and then it types it in correctly. The shortcut on the keyboard is Control V on on Excel. So make sure I get all of these. Pretty straightforward. And ooh, I don't need to make it bold. And then I need to do the same thing with my injury. So here you can see I have tendonitis and rotator cuff. We want everything to be spelled exactly the same. So I'm going to take injured and correct it so that everybody is just in two groups. Just making sure all of these are spelled correctly, no typos. That I'm very consistent. Perfect. and I'm going to hit save. Alright, I'm going to make sure I have all of the data cleaned up there. Everything looks good in that grouping. Okay, so the second part that I didn't really get into, which was the code book. So I showed you how to transpose the data. These are all my headings, and so I have label and type. Type represents what type of data. Is it a numeric data, ordinal data, or string data, which means it's a word. Most of this data is very much numeric. And then the label is, what am I calling this data? What does it all mean? So subject ID is just the identifier group. 2 equals healthy, 3 equals injured. So I actually identified by label that information in my data. Age is just the label, and it's a numeric value, just like height in inches, height in centimeters, weight in pounds, weight in kilograms. This is string data, so C equals Caucasian, A equals African American, M equals male, F equals female. And then I have my labels for all of my abbreviations. If you notice, in preparing this data to import in SPSS, I have no spaces. It used to be it wouldn't handle capital letters, but it seems to do well with that. But anytime I want to put a space, I use an underscore. All the yellows were just our calculations. And then as we get down here into the data, we have all of these repetitive posterior deltoid strength 1, 2, the average, and then the normalize. Upper trap was the same, infraspinatus is the same for IS, and LT for lower trap. So when we get down here to post, there's a shortcut that can be used. So I simply copied all of these pre's and then pasted them down here. Now I don't want to have to go through and relabel each one of those one by one. So if I highlight all of the data that is pre, I can replace the word pre with post. So the command is find and replace. So find, replace. So I'm going to find pre and replace it with post. And then I hit replaced all. It's automatically changed all of those terminologies. So it's really important to try to be consistent with your labeling so you can copy and paste and replace relatively fast and easy. Okay, so now that I've done that, I know what my data is. Everything is clean and organized. Now I save that, and I'm going to have to close that, and then I'm going to open my SPSS. So now I'm going to import my data from SPSS. So I'm going to go File, Import Data, and it's Excel type data. So on my computer I have hundreds of Excel files, so I have to go find the exact right Excel file that I'm going to use for this import command. So on my computer, that data is sitting in my Dropbox folder on the cloud under all my courses. RHB. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is the data strength. I have a key, which is what I've been working in, that has all the answers to all my homework questions, but you don't get to see that quite yet. But we're going to open that first data file. Now what it's going to do, because every tab and worksheet has a different bit of information, so it's going to look for the worksheet, but it drops down and shows all the different worksheets for all the different commands within that. So you have to make sure you understand which one do you want it to do. If you don't put a range, it'll just import all the data, which is what I want it to do. and it's estimated what kind of data this is, and we'll go through these little demonstrations. So it's going to read the variable names from the first row of data, so all of those are fields, and then if it will ignore hidden rows. I don't ever hide any rows that I'm going to move into SPSS. So then I'm simply going to hit OK. The computer takes a few seconds and it generates all of this data that we now have to go in and clean up. Okay, I'm going to pause here and then we'll continue. Okay, so now let me get back to SPSS. Make sure it is recording. I think it is. New software system. All right, so now we have two tabs. One says data view, one says variable view, and this is what SPSS has interpreted all of our data to be. So it brought in all of those labels that I gave it, and then it estimated what type of data this was. So I can override that and modify that as I want to. The key when you import data from Excel is 1, make sure Excel is closed. 2, go back and double check your Excel and make sure, sort of spot check as you go through those numbers. You can also see that it will give you lots and lots of data points, decimal points, that you really don't need that kind of accuracy or that kind of detail. So we can modify and correct that. It makes the data look really hard to interpret and understand, so you can knock that all down to 1 or 2 decimal points. I typically use 1 decimal point for most everything except for maybe percentage data. It depends on the accuracy of the data, but I would say you're fine to go on and change all of this down to 1 decimal point. Oh, so let me just highlight that to 1. I'm just highlighting it and changing that to 1. So now what you can see that do when you go back, it just gives you 1 decimal point. So you can go on and finish that up on your own and knock that out so you get everything down to 1 decimal point. The only one that I would maybe keep at 2 decimal points would be down here at the very end, that percentage calculation that you had. I would just make that 2 decimal points. You can do the up down arrows if you'd like, but it takes a while to do that. See, here's a good example of it thought it was string data even though it's actually numeric type data. So we want that to be numeric values. Now if you change that, if I just go in there and change it, it might erase all of that data. So let's cancel. Let's go see what it says it is. I'm not sure why it's reading that as numeric or as string data, but it is. Yeah. Okay, so that's the right numbers, but we don't want it to be that. We want it to be the other type of data. We want it to be numeric. And hit OK. So now what happens when I change that, I go back to data view. It moved that data over to the right. So apparently there was something in Excel that was making a lot of that data be text data instead of numeric. I have no idea why, but it certainly was. But it didn't erase the data, which is good. What it didn't do is it didn't change that symbol. So that symbol is indicated way over here on the right in the scale measure. So it's calling it numeric or nominal data or string data, and so you just have to change that to make it scale data, which is a numeric data. So this type and this measure should be consistent through your data. So you want to clean that, make sure everything is consistent as you look at and import that data. So go through that. Clean up all your data and make sure everything is working correctly. I'm going to pause this again. I'm going to clean my data and then show you what it looks like. Okay, So I've started to clean this SPSS data, but I think it's appropriate to show you some issues that I see that's going on. First, when I told you to use 1, that seemed to really make the data on the percentages really small. So it was really hard to appreciate differences with the normalized data. So here, if we look at this, it was rounding everything to 0.1 or 0.2, so it didn't show much variance. So it's much easier to see it if there's more variance. So I think I would change that to 2, and I just simply copied and pasted the number 2 throughout. Now, some of the data, like this one, which is numeric data, is still being read as string data. I'm assuming this is something from the Excel that didn't work right. So I'm going to convert this. Again, just like I did before, I'm going to go find that infraspinatus. There it is. It's reading into string data. I'm going to change it to numeric. I'm going to give it 2 decimal points. And so now it defaults to that. And then I have to go over here, change this from nominal, and make this scale or numeric data. And hopefully, on strength infraspinatus trial 1, we have numeric data with 2 decimal points. And it did. Perfect. So now that looks exactly the way it should. As we go back over, here's infraspinatus pre, and you have all your pretty numbers the way you want them. Now you can adjust this as you want to see information. If you like to be able to see it, just makes your data a little wider and a little harder to get to sometimes, but some people prefer to see it that way so they can see everything that's sort of going on as they're moving through their data. So it looks like we have everything straightened out. I don't see anything that's numeric. Oh, there it is again. There's the infraspinatus post that just didn't like that very much. Something with that strength for pre and post. Okay, so let's go down here. Let's find the string variable. There she blows. We're going to change that again. Numeric. I know this is exciting stuff, but it's the details that have to be done if you're managing data to make sure everything works correctly. Alright, there's strength infraspinatus post 1. So there's strength infraspinatus post 1. There we go. So now it's all back in order. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So I think there was one other data point that was a little funky. That was it. So there's some pin satisfaction post was labeled not as numeric data. So it's really important that you understand the data that you enter and make sure it all makes sense. So there's pin satisfaction post. It's calling it numeric, so it just changed this goofy scale measurement here. So all the time, as long as I've been doing this, I've always had to go through this sort of step of making sure everything is coded correctly. And if you don't do this, when you go to do a calculation, it's not going to let you do what you want it to do unless everything is set up exactly right. Okay, so now all that is done. I want to save all that data that I just imported, so I'm going to save that into my file. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm basically going to call it data I'm going to call it class data. I guess it would be easiest if everybody saved it as that information. Good. Okay, so I made a big deal out of having all of these variables so you understood everything that was going on here. Sex and race is sort of squunched together. Okay, So one of the reasons for that is over here in variable view, we have this labeling. So you don't have to use this goofy terminology that I created. You can use full and complete words. So if you go back to your Excel document, now that you've saved it, you can open your Excel document. And then go back to the data, the value that the Excel file that you wanted, and actually copy that codebook information over into whatever labeling you would like to have there. So I think it'll probably make the most sense to start just copying the basic information over. So I go there. These are all my pin values. And now I have those actual definitions there. So instead of it giving me pen, sats, pre, it'll actually give me this whole word in my outputs. So it actually makes sense when you're interpreting your data, if you have injured or healthy, male and female, and all of those components. So when we talk about labeling, remember in this group and diagnosis are really representing the same thing. And I wanted to show it to you both ways so that you would understand that you don't need to have it both ways as long as you have a code book. But right now I have group, which is an ordinal or a string variable. And then I have diagnosis, which is definitely a string variable. So I can change this group so that 2 equals healthy and 3 equals injured within this variable label. So it's reading group as numeric. It's just coding it as nominal, which is wrong. I'll change that over to scale. But now what we can do is we can change the values so that 2 actually represents a word and 3 actually represents a word. So basically I have made, I'll hit OK. I've basically made that diagnosis string variable unnecessary. So I don't even have to have that, because now when I hit this A, so the numeric to text, it just changes those back and forth. It's representing exactly the same information. So I just wanted to show you that you would be able to do that. So if you want to, and most databases like numbers, so if you can use number assignment for your group or your sex or even your race, and just have that labeling system set up, then you can have that information and then code it into this SPSS, so you have that data to analyze. We call that dummy coding variables. So calling it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 could represent blacks, 2 could represent Caucasians, 3 could represent Hispanics, and so on and so forth. As long as you keep the same code and everybody knows how to code that, that's entering your data, you're covered. Alright, I think that is everything that I wanted to show you. So we imported data, clean up the decimals, add the labels and values to create in the code book, confirm the numeric, and save that code book. So the only thing I really haven't done is I haven't gone through and copied over all of these labels into my SPSS labels. And values and labels are different. This is just representing the names of the variable name. Values actually like 2, 3, 1. When you put stuff in the value column, actually is representing a dummy code variable. But this is just showing you how that would print out when we run our data analysis. So hopefully this was helpful and you can follow along and catch up so we can move forward in class on Thursday. I'll try to get ahead and put this information out on the web ahead of time so you'll have this to refer back to. Thanks and have a good day.